Good evening, everyone. I'm Nika, founder of Teams of Friends United, TAFO abbreviated, which is a non-profit, non-protesting nature conservation organization. I started this having in mind that there is a need for a responsibility awakening call, as I have a feeling that many people are talking about the need for action, but asking other people to do it, not actually doing it themselves. This is one of my colleagues, Celeste Gracia. She represents the whole of South America and Mexico. So I'll pass it on to her now.
Hello. We promise you that we won't only be talking about conservation, but we will be doing a lot of things, including cleaning, educating, and many other actions that could help convert, especially the young generations and teens, towards nature and a different way of living and thinking more sustainably. We're preparing a lot of projects, which soon will be on our website and our social media. And for today, for this project, we have invited the Red Sea Project organization, and they've happily accepted to give this talk and support our work, which we are really grateful for. And we are proud to announce Starr Sams from Red Sea Project talking about the 5 turtles of the Red Sea for TAFU. I hope you all enjoy, and if you have any questions, the answers will follow Starr's presentation.
Okay, thank you guys. I'm just gonna start sharing my screen now. One of you might have to allow me to share my screen.
Oh yeah, I'll allow that, sorry.
No worries. There we go. So, hopefully, can you guys see the screen? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so as you said, this is a presentation about the turtles of the Red Sea. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about the Red Sea Project, and then we'll start talking about the turtles. So, yeah, you guys have got your microphones muted. If you have any questions, just either put them in the chat or you guys can ask me them at the end and we can do it like a question and answer thing. So I'm Starr Sams. I am a marine biologist and I'm a trainer with the Red Sea Project. My background, I have a degree in marine vertebrate zoology. A lot of the research that I've done so far has been focused on sharks, but I love diving in the Red Sea. And so about 6 months ago, I got involved in the Red Sea Project. My main passions are scientific communication and outreach. So I love being able to work with a conservation organization that's focused on outreach and getting the public involved in citizen science to help the conservation goals. So I have done a bit of work with turtles before, mainly with green turtles, and a lot of work with the interactions between turtles and sharks. So I will go into that a little bit more later on, but yeah, that's me and that's my background. So this is the Red Sea Turtles Project, and the main aims of the Red Sea Project are education, observation, and conservation. So education through webinars like this, but also through our blog posts so we can talk about all different species in the Red Sea, safer and more sustainable ways to interact with animals in the Red Sea, and making sure that diving is done in a sustainable way without harming the ecosystem. And for the observation part, we really want to get people involved in citizen science. So by taking photos and telling us about their observations, we can then use that to help promote conservation and monitoring of the populations within the Red Sea. So here's just a little bit about what I'm going to talk to you about today. So we'll start with the species that are found in the Red Sea, then move on to their conservation status and a bit more about the individual species, then talk about the code of conduct and the best practice if you are ever in the water with the turtle, and then how citizen science can benefit the turtle populations in the Red Sea. So these are the 5 species that are found in the Red Sea. There are 7 species of sea turtles found in subtropical and tropical waters globally. And these 5 are the ones that are found in the Red Sea. 2 of these species are not so common, they're quite rare in the Red Sea, but then 3 species are seen quite commonly. So I'll start with the rare species. So marine turtles, sea turtles, they are a really, really ancient group of animals. They've been on the planet since dinosaurs were around. It's estimated that the first turtles evolved around 110 to 120 million years ago. So they're a really ancient group of animals, and they are reptiles, so they have to breathe air. So they live in the ocean, but they have to breathe air. And even though they have to breathe air, some species can dive to 1,000 meters deep, which is really, really amazing that they can go that deep, even though they have to come up to breathe. But they're really important for ecosystems like coral reef ecosystems and seagrass bed habitats. They graze on algae, they feed on, different species feed on different things, but they help to maintain healthy ecosystems. That's one really important role that they play in this environment. So this is an olive Ridley turtle. They're named after the olivey kind of color of their shell. So these are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. So I'll talk about that a little bit more detail later on. But they're actually one of the most abundant species. So all turtles, unfortunately, are at risk, but these are one of the most abundant species. But they are listed as vulnerable because they only nest in a really small area. So there's not that many places around the world where they go to lay their eggs. So this means that they're at greater risk, because if they can't then use those beaches to lay their eggs, it means that they can't reproduce. So the leatherback turtle, this is another one of the species that's not seen so commonly. This is the largest sea turtle species around the world. They're named after their shells, which are actually a lot softer than the other species of sea turtle shells. So they feel leathery, which is where they get the name leatherback. And these guys are much more wide-ranging. They're found in a lot more places, but unfortunately, in the last 50 years or so, their populations have declined massively. And it's thought that this is because of human impacts such as poaching for their eggs or poaching them for their meat and things like that. So all the turtles in the Red Sea are protected by local laws, but this doesn't mean that illegal activities don't still go on and they're not hunted illegally. So these are the regular species that we do see quite often in the Red Sea. And there's these 3 species. And I'll start off by telling you a little bit, before I go into detail about the Hawksbill turtle, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the IUCN Red List is. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with the IUCN, but they are the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So they produce this massive thing called the Red List, where they try and assess different species to show how at risk of extinction they are. So the extinct, that means that that animal does not exist on Earth anymore. They don't exist at all. Extinct in the wild, that means that they still exist in captivity, but there are no wild populations left. So it's very likely that species that are extinct in the wild, it's very hard to then breed them to a point where they're going to be re-released. They quite often do end up going extinct. And then you have these 3 categories that are the threatened categories, and critically endangered is the worst one. So that means that they are at very high risk of going extinct in the near future. Whereas endangered means that they're at high risk of going extinct in the near future, but not quite as high risk as the critically endangered. And then the vulnerable means that they are at risk of going extinct in sort of a more longer term scale. So not quite so soon as the other 2, but still at high risk. And then near threatened, that means that they're not currently at risk of going extinct, but they could be in the future. And least concern means that they're very abundant and we're not really worried about them. They're doing quite well. So unfortunately, the Hawksbill turtle, which is one of the more commonly seen species in the Red Sea, is listed globally as critically endangered, which means that their populations are declining, they're not doing very well. And there's a number of reasons why different species could be listed as critically endangered, and this can be, like I said before, if they only nest in a very small area, that can impact how likely they are to be able to reproduce. Also, if they're particularly targeted, that can make a species more at risk. And also if they have very specific habitat needs. So some species that can only exist in a very small temperature range, for example, this can make them more at risk. So the Hawksbill turtle, that's enough about the red list, but I'll tell you a bit about the species now. So the Hawksbill turtle, they're named after their like pointed beak. So you can see in the diagram, it's very like triangular and pointed. And they're found throughout the tropics, but primarily in coral reef environments. So they feed on soft corals and sponges, but they can also feed on sea anemones and jellyfish. So here we can see a hawksbill from the side. You can see that pointy beak that they have. And then here you can see them feeding. So they use it kind of like a bird would to go in and grab its food. And then the green turtle, this is one of the largest species of turtles, and they're listed endangered. And these turtles are the only herbivorous species. So these ones only feed on plants or algae. So they feed on seagrass and algae, and they're really, really important for maintaining the health of these ecosystems. So when I've worked and done some research that's involved this species, these are a main prey species for tiger sharks. So tiger sharks eat green turtles, but this can be a problem in areas where there aren't enough tiger sharks, or if there aren't enough turtles, because it has a knock-on effect throughout the ecosystem. So the turtles are kind of like lawnmowers. They make sure the seagrass doesn't grow out of control. But then if there aren't any tiger sharks to predate upon the turtles, it means that the seagrass will be grazed too much, so there won't be enough seagrass left. So this is an example of how ecosystems really need the right amount of each species to keep everything in balance and keep everything healthy. So these guys, they also undertake really long migrations. So this is one of the species that we know returns back to the same beach that they hatched from. So wherever their mother went to lay their eggs, and the turtle hatched and then it entered the ocean, the females then returned to the exact same beach to go and lay their eggs as well. So these guys have to undertake really long migrations sometimes to go back to those beaches to lay their eggs from the areas that they've been feeding in. And so you can see here, he's just feeding on some seagrass. And here, this is a really good image for me to talk about just how beautiful those turtle shells are. So this is actually not a very good thing for the turtles, the fact that they are so beautiful, because it has made them be at higher risk from humans who want to use their shells or have them for decoration. So part of the reason why turtles in the past have been hunted is for those shells to either make things or just have them as a decorative thing, because they are so beautiful. And so the other common species in the Red Sea is the Loggerhead Turtle. And these guys are listed as vulnerable. They have really large heads with really powerful jaws. And this is because they have slightly different feeding preferences to the others. All of those heads are adapted to suit their feeding preference. So these guys have strong jaws because they like to feed on things that are in shells, like clams or sea urchins. And so they have to break through the shell to be able to eat them. So that's why their head is kind of wider and a lot stronger than the other species. And it's thought that this species is one of the most common in the Mediterranean because they lay eggs on beaches all around the Mediterranean, in Egypt and Turkey, and in lots of different areas they have nesting beaches there. So here you can see the difference just in the shells across the different species. And that's one way that we can identify them, is from these views like this from above, where you can see the shell. And so now I'm just going to talk a bit about the conservation status of turtles, both globally and in the Red Sea. So on a global scale, there are a number of threats to turtles. So one that everybody always talks about, everyone knows about, is plastic pollution. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail on the next slide. But there are a lot of other ways that turtles are threatened. So whether it's the poaching and the hunting for their shells or their meat, also they can be, just the eggs can be poached, so they're dug up on the beaches. That's why in a lot of places now we have turtle patrols when they are nesting to make sure that nobody can get to the eggs. Also, another threat is being caught in fishing gear. So whether this is like live fishing gear that people are using currently, so nets and lines and things like that, but also a massive problem for turtles is ghost fishing gear. So this is when fishing gear has either fallen off a boat or been cut off or discarded in the middle of the ocean. It just floats around and the turtles can get trapped in it. And even though when they're resting, some species can stay underwater for 4 to 7 hours. They can hold their breath a long time when they're relaxed and resting. But when they are stressed and threatened because they're trapped in a net, some turtles can die within minutes of not being able to breathe trapped in a net. So this is a really, really big problem. And another human impact is the loss of their nesting sites. So in a lot of the areas where turtles go to nest, it's like nice tropical beaches where people might want to go on their vacations. And these areas can be developed, building hotels, things like that. And this can be a really big problem if these beaches that they return to have their eggs, if these beaches are covered or there's things built on them, this can be a really big problem. So in the Red Sea, this is an example of a turtle that had unfortunately been reported as dead. Some scientists went out to do a post-mortem and take measurements and things like that and try and figure out how it died. And unfortunately, this turtle was known to have ingested plastic, and that was what killed it. So you can see here that plastic bags, things, transparent plastic, this can really look like a jellyfish or any other type of prey. They can feed on it, and it can either choke them as they eat it, or it can build up in their stomach if it's smaller pieces, which then prevents their digestion and they end up starving. So this is an example of plastic pollution being really harmful for turtles as well as lots of other species. Another example of human exploitation, and these turtles were found in a restaurant in Egypt. They were in these containers for weeks. They couldn't move. It was very harmful for them. The restaurant owner didn't realize the harm that they were causing. They just bought the turtles from a fisherman. And it turned out one of them is a Hawksbill turtle and one of them is a green turtle. And the green turtle had injuries to the front flippers where it had been trying to get out of the little container. And the Hawksbill turtle was having respiratory problems. It couldn't breathe properly, which meant that it couldn't dive. So after they'd been rescued and rehabilitated, the Hawksbill turtle had to have a bit more treatment because when they tried to release it, it was just floating. It couldn't dive to find its food and stuff. But in the end, you'll be pleased to know both the turtles were released. They were tagged. So this silver thing on the flipper, you can see it in both these pictures. That is a tag. So that means that if the turtle is caught by another researcher, or even if someone is out swimming or snorkeling or diving and they take a photo of it, you can see that tag, and if they get a close-up of the tag, they can identify that it is that individual. So here you can see it being released. And unfortunately, talking about human impacts, these are some of the negative things that we can see when people are in the water with turtles. Obviously, we don't want to see people standing on turtles. We don't want to see people holding them, grabbing them, riding them, chasing them. They are wild animals and they deserve to be treated with respect. So it's definitely a hands-off policy. Don't touch them. There is really no need. You can still have amazing interactions with them without having to touch them in any way. And so we have a little bit of a code of conduct for being in the water with turtles. And so definitely hands off is the way to go. Try and give them some space. So try and make sure you give them about 2 meters space at least. If you are taking photos, that's amazing. That's really great because we can use them for our photo identification, but try not to use any flash photography because that can be quite scary for the turtles. Similarly, don't use motorized dive things. I'm not quite sure what they're called, those things that kind of scoot you along under the water. And same with acoustic transmitters. They're not great for the animals, especially not the turtles. And definitely don't feed them. They are wild animals. You don't want to be feeding and encouraging those close contacts with humans because not everyone has the best intentions for them, unfortunately. So here's a couple of things that we do want to do, especially if you are diving on scuba. Make sure that you have good buoyancy control, especially if you're around seagrass beds and green turtles or coral reefs. You don't want to be crashing into the seabed because you can't control your buoyancy and causing a lot of damage. And also, don't spend too much time around them. It's so great to have these interactions, but the turtles probably aren't going to want you following them around for like 3 hours. Try and limit your time with them to a maximum of about 30 minutes so that they're not constantly being surrounded by people. And if you're in a group, try and stick together. Don't kind of all spread out and gather around it so it's surrounded by people. So as I was saying about photography, it's a really great tool for citizens to get involved in the scientific research. So if anyone is ever in the Red Sea and you see a turtle, get photos. By all means, get photos. Even if you can't get photos, still report the sighting if you can identify what species it is. On our website, we have this report sighting tool where you can say what you've seen, and it's really useful for us to gather that data and find out what people are seeing and in what area. So here's just a little bit about photo ID. And these are all available on the e-library on our website. But when you're looking at the turtle like this, the main parts that we need to see for the photo ID is the shell on the back, like I said in that picture before, and then each side of their head. So these are the main ways that we can identify individuals. We have a catalogue on the website. It's Turtles of the Red Sea on the website, and there's a whole catalogue of different photos and they all have different names, so definitely check that out if you're interested. It's really great to see all the different ones with different names, and that's how we can identify whether we've seen the same turtle and if it's in the same place or a different location. Similarly, on the website we have in the e-library a turtle nesting guidelines little booklet here, where it tells you about what to do, how to behave if you're in an area on the beach where turtles are coming up to nest. Definitely important to keep distance. You don't want to be scaring them off. You don't want to be causing any damage. We need them to be having those babies. They're really, really important to help repopulate the species. So those are the guidelines for when turtles are nesting. On the website, we also have lots of different blog posts in 12 different languages at the moment. We're hoping to get even more. So there's guidance for scuba divers. There's lots of different information about different individual species, and we're posting those all the time. So definitely check those out if you get a chance. Like I said, 12 languages at the moment. We're hoping to get even more on there. So yeah, that's everything about turtles from me. And thank you all for listening. Here is all the socials. We are all volunteers and we're giving up our time and investing in the project. So if you guys can follow on the socials and spread the word, we would really, really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them my way now. But yeah, thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Starr. That was really, really good. I do have some questions out of your presentation. Okay, so you mentioned like particularly the Hawksbill turtle.
Yeah.
Is like at a point where it's almost extinct, right? Like on its last at risk label.
Yeah,
in the red category. So is it possible that this species, instead of moving towards the extinct area, like it can move forward? Are there any ways that we can help it go back, like for it to repopulate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, a lot of the problems that we're seeing as in turtles, but also in a lot of other species that are now classed as critically endangered, a lot of the problems we're seeing, they are because of human impacts. So by removing these impacts, we can hope that the populations can repopulate, they will grow again and move out of these categories. So there have been examples with species on the red list that have been in higher risk categories and then they've moved down because of protective legislation, whether it's putting more measures in place, harsher punishments on people that are caught doing illegal things with them. And so we are really hoping like that the Hawksbill Turtle, for example, one of the reasons why they have become critically endangered is because of people wanting their shells. So they're now under CITES legislation. So that's CITES. And that's the, right, let me think. The Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. It's a very long name, but basically that's a global convention. That means that people cannot move certain things between different countries. So basically it means that at the airport, if you were trying to take a Hawksbill turtle shell to a different country and someone found it in your bag, you would be in big trouble. So that's a really good thing. There's quite harsh punishments for it. So that means that it tries to discourage people from doing it in the first place. So legislation like this and governments working together to make sure and try and prevent people from targeting these species is a really good way that we can try and help the populations grow again.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That gives us hope.
Yeah, there is definitely hope.
I got a question too. Is there an example of a turtle that was extinct in the wild but became not extinct in the wild?
No, there isn't. There actually was a lot of species of turtles in the past that have become extinct. But so far, the 7 species that exist now, they're the only ones that we know of having existed kind of in the past time that humans have been around. So there were a lot of species that existed millions of years ago. There was one species called Archelon, I think, and it was this giant turtle. Some of them were like 7 meters long. So we know about them from the fossil record, but they've never existed kind of at the same time as humans.
Something, what was also the turtle that was found the most recent, like discovered recent? Is there?
I'm not sure which species was discovered most recently, but I know that there has been some debate within the scientific community about whether there is 7 or 8 species. So some scientists think that this species that they call, I think it's called the black turtle, a lot of scientists think that it's just a subspecies of the green turtle. So basically you can get subspecies of, it's the same animal, but if they live, maybe one lives in the Atlantic Ocean and one lives in the Pacific Ocean, sometimes there can be a bit of confusion about whether they belong to the same species or whether they are different enough to belong to different species. So I'm not sure exactly which was the most recently discovered, but I know there is still ongoing debate about whether those 2 are one species or 2.
I have a question about the green turtle.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned they go back to where they were first, like where they hatched, basically. Yeah. What is it that they have, or how do they recognize?
That's a really great question. So that's another thing that scientists aren't 100% sure, but they think that it could be to do with turtles have this special thing in their head. It's like an extra organ, and they think that they can use it to detect magnetic fields. So they think that they can use that to detect the Earth's magnetic field to guide them back to where they hatched. And they think that they use that in combination with like other senses, so visual cues or chemical cues, so kind of like smelling. And they can use all of those things to guide them back to where they hatched. Another kind of train of thought that people think they might use is that the young female turtles will follow the older female turtles who've been back many times. So there's a couple of different things. They're not 100% sure, but those are kind of the main thoughts.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
What are the positive and negative impacts of tourism on turtles?
Oh, that's great. So one of the most obvious negatives is like those images you saw of the people kind of grabbing them and not treating them very nicely. When people aren't aware and they don't have the education, which is what we're really trying to do with the project, is not just for local people, but for tourists visiting the Red Sea, is to make sure that people are aware of, with the codes of conduct, of how you need to behave around these animals to keep them safe and also to keep yourself safe. So obviously, one impact is that in areas with lots of tourism, you quite often end up with a lot more rubbish being thrown away, a lot more litter from single-use plastics and things like that. So that can be one negative impact. But also just when people see something that they've never seen before, like I see a turtle and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. But people that don't necessarily have the awareness of how to interact with them might see a turtle and think, wow, look, I'm going to go and grab hold of it and it can pull me along underwater. And that's what we don't want people to be doing. But there are also positives. It's not all bad news. Tourism can have really, really positive impacts on species, especially those that are threatened, because the more rare something is, the more people want to see it. So it's something that I'm seeing a lot in my work with sharks as well, is that people are turning from fishing them and targeting them or poaching to wanting to use their skills of knowing where they are to take people out and see them. And people will pay money for ecotourism to go and have interactions with them and see them. So tourism can have a really positive impact of generating money to help protect the animals rather than harvesting them.
I've also got another question about the green turtle.
Yeah.
They nest in the Mediterranean? Do they nest also in like France and Italy? Or?
I'm not entirely sure. I think probably yes, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't done much work around like the northern Mediterranean. But I would think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
I have a question about the first species you mentioned. I can't recall the name.
Let me have a look in my notes. The olive Ridley turtle?
Yes.
Yeah.
You said it only nests in one like particular area, which is why it's endangered. So I was wondering, like, what do they have in that area that they can't find anywhere else?
Yeah, so it's not so much that they only nest in one area. It might be just that in like a certain country they may only nest on one beach. So it can be in different areas around the world, but it's just a very restricted location. So it might be that in one country they only like one certain beach, or they like the conditions in a certain place. So they think that this could be to do with the whole thing of them going back to where they hatched from, and it just happens to be that over time those areas that they've hatched from has narrowed down. So turtles can have quite a lot of eggs. So in each clutch of eggs they can have 150, but and then each nesting season they can have 2 to 6 clutches. So that's quite a lot of eggs. But the problem is only 1 in 1,000 of those eggs is going to survive to adulthood. So they have a really, really low survival rate, that even if a lot of them are going to reproduce, we need as many of them to actually lay eggs as possible. So that's another reason why populations are declining and why it's really important to protect those beaches where they are nesting.
Okay, thank you.
What's the life expectancy?
Oh, that's another great question. So we're not 100% sure. That's an answer in a lot of marine biology, is we're not 100% sure. But we think that life expectancy is between 50 to 100 years. So it's kind of similar to like human life expectancy, basically. And the other reason, alongside the other ones I mentioned, why they can be more at risk is because they're very late to mature. So when we talk about animals and reproduction, we talk about it along a scale. So there's some species like little fish that will have thousands and thousands of eggs, but they don't invest in them very much. They just have thousands and not many survive. And they reproduce quite quickly and die quite quickly. Whereas things that live longer tend to reproduce later. And turtles don't reach maturity until they're 20 to 30 years old. So if you think about turtles that are dying in fishing nets or being targeted by poachers, we have to have turtles that survive for 20 to 30 years with all these threats to even have babies. So that's another reason why animals with this life history strategy, that means that they reproduce late, tend to be the ones that are more threatened, because they have to survive longer to then reproduce and create more.
What's the oldest known turtle?
I honestly don't know. I think the one that they think has the longest life expectancy is the leatherback, because they're the biggest, I think. But I honestly don't know what the oldest known turtle is.
Okay.
I have a question about the, what's it called? It's the loggerhead.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like its beak is stronger than most because
Yeah.
it eats like hard shell creatures.
Yeah.
So does this make it more dangerous? Is the turtle aggressive, or is it really just?
No, I mean, turtles aren't typically aggressive, but obviously if you're going to be harassing it and trying to irritate it, there's a chance that it could come around and bite you. And with a loggerhead, they do have a big head and a very strong jaw, so if it did bite you, it probably would hurt. But no turtles really are known to be aggressive. You can be in the water with them and keep your distance, don't annoy it, don't grab hold of it or do anything to hurt it, and it's not gonna be bothered by your presence. So.
Okay.
Is there a history of how turtles adapted to live in the sea, even though they're reptiles?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I actually did some work whilst I was at university on evolution and how different marine organisms evolved. And so currently the thoughts are that turtles were most closely related to giant marine reptiles, so kind of like marine dinosaurs. Like plesiosaurs. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of those. They think that they kind of adapted the same way that they did, and they were a close relative. So the main way that reptiles, originally everything started in the water. So originally everything evolved from fish, and then things moved on to land, and then things moved back into the ocean. So that's kind of how that happened. Turtles' flippers have bones in them that look like fingers, kind of. So that's what they look like inside, and that when you look at skeletons of different animals, you can kind of see how things through evolutionary time adapted to be able to swim better. So yeah, that's kind of the background. It's very complicated to try and explain without diagrams and stuff, but hopefully that explains it a bit for you.
Oh, okay. I don't think there's any other questions.
That's okay. I hope that answered everything for you. But if you guys, you have my contact details and stuff. And if you have any other questions at a later date, just let me know. And yeah, all the details are on here if you want to find out any more about the project. But thank you for having me, and keep up all the good work. You guys are doing amazing.
Thank you for your presentation and helping us.
You're very welcome. Just let me know if you need anything else.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Watching.
Bye.
Bye.